Hello and welcome to Rainbow History class, the queer and trans history that you probably don't get in school. My name is Rudy Jean Rigg.
And my name is Hannah McElhinney. And I'm sorry, I spilt a falafel down my shirt, so it's a bit wet. But anyway.
That sounds like a 2006 hipster album name.
We'll talk about that on the next episode. I should do this bit again for the next episode. No. Get us into this one. What are we talking about today, Rudy?
Well, we are going to be covering the history of the mullet, but before we get there, I do want to let our local Brisbaneites know that we are coming to Brisbane for the first time and we are doing some live shows as part of the Brisbane Melt Festival in November. So you can catch us at the Brisbane Powerhouse. We're going to do our stand-up comedy show, which we have. It's a little bit different to hearing us on the podcast every week, so that's why you should definitely come. We're playing 3 shows. We've got Thursday, the November 7th at 6:45, Friday, November 8th at the same time, 6:45, and then our last night is Saturday, November 9th at 6:45 again. It's an hour-long show, give or take. I think. We normally go over. So you get more bang for your buck, but head on out in November to see us. We'd love to see you there. So with that out the way, talking about the mullet today, Hannah.
We are talking about the mullet since you just said that, which I'm excited about because I had one for a bit.
Did you? I was going to ask, what's your opinion on them?
I love it. I think it's a great haircut for curly hair.
I would agree. What kind of mullet did you have? Did you have like a subtype of a mullet? Or?
No, and it was a very long mullet, a very loose mullet. But what I thought it was good is it did make me feel a little bit like, what would I say? Julia Lewis? Is that her name?
I don't know.
Is that her name?
Who's Julia Lewis? Julia Lewis. Juliette Lewis.
That's
is
the
a
one.
Singer, American actress and singer.
Juliette Lewis. Yeah, that's who I felt like.
She's known for her portrayals of offbeat characters, often in films with dark plots, themes, and settings.
Which
hello. Yeah.
Yeah, so I had a mullet.
Okay. All right. How old were you when you had a mullet?
I think I knew you, but it wasn't until a bit before.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
okay,
it was not a hardcore mullet. It was like a choppy mullet.
Okay. Were you calling it a mullet?
No, I'd made that as a mistake.
Okay. Well, that's interesting that you made it as a mistake because that was a word for it at one point.
Huh.
And potentially still is. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
But look, I think when we think of mullets, even in a queer sense, we do kind of cast our eyes back to something a bit more contemporary, like the 1970s and 80s. Even like the early 2000s, I feel like, right? Like mullets, in our minds, that's where I cast my mind to until I looked into the history of it. And Hannah, I want you to guess when mullets were first described or when like the first mullet ever was.
Well, so definitely David Bowie comes to my mind as like a mullet.
Yeah.
So I think it would be long before that. I almost feel like, hang on.
I like how you said David Bowie in the 70s. Really far beyond that.
Really far beyond that, yeah. You know what? I reckon that this is a guess,
okay.
But something like, you know, the ancient Greeks or the Trojan. It's giving like a Trojan war hairstyle.
Yeah, almost.
Am I not wrong?
Not wrong. Just choose Romans or Greeks.
Romans. I'm going with Rome.
There's no right answer. That was a trick question. That's because the history of the macaroni, the history of the mullet is widespread. It's mysterious and it has an illustrious allure to it. In that we have no real great like pinpoint grasp on like when it was actually first popularized, mostly because it has, like you said, its roots in kind of war or more like laborious activities. So the first written mention that we have is actually by Homer in the Iliad, which was written around 750 to 700 BC.
I told you it was long before David Bowie.
Yes. Well, yeah, but you didn't stipulate how long. But I will say you technically got it right.
idea.
So Homer described warriors with having long hair at the back. That's what he said.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
Okay,
great. And to complement that, ancient depictions of Greek gods, so in statues, they were often depicted with a mullet-esque hairstyle, often curly. That was kind of the vibe of the statues. I don't know whether that's because Greek people actually had typically curly hair or whether that was an artistic choice. I'm not sure, but there was mullets happening in these ancient statues. So, for example, the statue of Apollo Belvedere, a Roman copy of a lost bronze statue that was dated between 350 to 325 BC, is one that shows, essentially what is a mullet.
Okay, before we get back onto the mullets, which I know we're only just getting into the mullets, do you know what my favorite thing about history is? Okay, this is a really specific thing.
Okay.
But just how up until pretty recently, everyone just like loved to copy everyone else's work. Like that was, if you were an artist, you'd see like a statue and you'd be like, I must copy it to a T. And that's like what art was for basically most of time. Only now everybody's like, that's actually not original. That is a ripoff. Whereas back then, it was kind of people felt like it was their duty to do exact replicas of other people's paintings.
Yeah, well, wasn't it like I don't know, like because I know back particularly in like ancient Greece and Rome, the whole like concept of art was to replicate the ideal form of something.
Yeah.
Which
essentially
is like pretty crazy. And like, I just want to know like the interaction between the first impressionist and like, I think it was Aristotle who had like the idea of forms. Like, I just want to know, like, did Aristotle just lose his goddamn mind when he was like, what the fuck have you painted? And the guy's like, what do you mean? It's a chair. And it's just like a bunch of
If you squint
blobs.
and you stand back, it's a chair.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know.
Anyway, you can go back to your mullets now. That's just what I wanted to start with.
Okay, thank you. I will go back to my mullets. And then another example of ancient mullets is a metal figurine that was found in 2018 during the preparations of a new car park at this big, huge estate called the Wimpole Estate.
Hang on.
What?
Is the figurine from 2018 or is it from an ancient time?
It's from the 1st century AD.
And it was just chilling in a car park.
Yeah, it was like they were digging up this car park of this English estate in like in the countryside. It's this huge like Downton Abbey style thing. They were digging up the front to put a car park in. And this metal figurine, that was found is hypothesized by archaeologists to be made by people who lived on the land back during the Roman occupation. So, yeah, and this little figurine depicted a little mullet thing on his head. Like, I know. And so I'm thinking like, okay, so mullets are really old and they, I guess in this instance is, were seen in ancient Rome, in Greece. Reason being is like, they had to have business in the front, party in the back for practical reasons. It was like a military thing, they needed to have like hair covering their neck, to keep the wind and the sun off of it. And also when they wear helmets, so it's like protection against their neck. And then they needed to have it cut off the front so that they could see. And, it was a practical thing.
Okay, so the hair at the back, that is true. One of my favorite things about having longer hair is that I don't need to put sunscreen on my neck.
Yeah, exactly. And what's more gayer than the ancient Greeks and Romans? So case closed. That's the gay history.
All right, see you later.
Bye, everyone.
Yep, they were gay. But also, just like, wow, imagine finding a tiny little mullet guy and it being ancient Roman.
Well, and like a little metal figurine. Like I don't actually know what the figurine was for. Maybe like was it a trading card or like it
was
like,
probably some Roman kids like soldier figurine.
Tarzo, yeah.
Probably an ancient Tarzo.
Yeah. But aside from the Greeks and Romans, there was an anonymous letter written in Old English talking about the Vikings. And in this letter, a man advises his brother to stick with the prevailing Anglo-Saxon style and not to enter into quote unquote Danish fashion, which he describes as having a reverse quote unquote mullet hairstyle. That wasn't the word that was used, but that's what is being put in. So a mullet hairstyle with long hair on top of the head and short hair at the back. So they were talking about this Danish hairstyle that was the opposite of what Anglo-Saxon style was.
So basically had no useful practicality to it. If you've got short hair on the back and long hair on the front, that's just for looks.
Yeah, exactly, which is why this man was advising his brother not to do it, because he was like, these Danish guys are whack. Like, don't do their reverse mullet. It's crazy.
Imagine writing a letter to your brother to advise them not to take a hairstyle.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, that's kind of cute because I love thinking about years and years and years ago, people just like talking to their friends and family being like, can I pull this off?
Yeah.
Like, is this a vibe?
Like using their family's only like pen and paper to like write to their friends.
But there's no photos and they live really far away. So they had to describe it and sketch it and be like, hear ye, is this ye a vibe? Yeah, that's how I imagined it went back then. But also, wow. And I actually have the Saxon hairstyle. I think they did the cropped on top, right?
Yeah. And again, it was like this, it was practical. They were like, you know, colonizers and pillagers. And so they were wearing helmets and, you know, for Vikings, obviously we have lots of different Vikings and, you know, I'm not going to go into the Ostrogoths and blah, blah, blah. But like, you know, the hair was part of their whole thing. Like you could hair was part of the different groups of Vikings. So different Vikings would use and showcase like different hairstyles.
Yep.
And in a practical sense, again, they were wearing like helmets and they were doing their hair up for different reasons and with different braids and stuff. So, the mullet again played in like a large practical part in terms of, you know, needing to keep it out of their face. And so they're just hacking at it with their Viking knives, I assume. So Vikings had it. Again, what do we know about Vikings? We haven't covered it on the show, but in the book and online, they're gay. So,
well, they frequently engaged in same-sex relations, but it was permissible. It was permissible, just like in ancient Rome, if you were the top.
Yeah, yeah. So they
were bottom shamers.
We once called them bottom shamers on TikTok, and then everyone seemed to hate us.
The alt-right loves Vikings so much that when we just even suggested that same-sex liaisons happened amongst the Vikings, we just got trolled so intensely with all these people being like, it was for punishment. And it got to the point where there's a famous, well, I don't want to say famous. I'm not talking about Taylor Swift famous. I'm talking about like Viking historian famous. Yeah. Specializing in same-sex relations in among the Vikings.
Yeah.
And I was this close to getting this historian onto TikTok. Into the comments to kind of help us out there. But then I remembered that the alt-right don't deserve my time.
No, they don't deserve anyone's time.
Or this incredibly studious Viking historian who had more credentials than the average profile pic alt-right dude on TikTok.
Yeah, who's fatherless now? We've got a Viking historian dad. All right, back off. So the reason I'm saying like, oh, the Greeks and the Romans, they're gay, lol. They also have a mullet. The Vikings, they also have a mullet, like whatever. Is because I often tell stories that get a little bit of backlash about the whole like, oh, where's the queer history in this? And I think number one, listen to the whole episode. But number two, that would be my first handy hint. But number two, I think particularly what we find, Hannah, today in this story about the mullet is that it's quite an intersectional story, and because like it has, you know, no real one kind of point where it all started, it's kind of ebbing and flowing through lots of different intersections, and the intersections that we'll be talking about today will become clear. But I do think that it's one of those cases of like not everything is gay, but there is gay in everything, and I think we're finding our way there. So I digress. The next group of people that have mullets and have a close tie to the mullet hairstyle are Indigenous people of America. And I will say that it was kind of hard to find any trustworthy information that wasn't written by a white person about this information. So just keep that in mind. Unfortunately, the most available information that I found on this was from a colonizer's perspective, saying that like colonizers wrote about like quote unquote tribes like having particularly mullet style hairdos. And what annoyed me about that was like what I understand is like, again, hair is really integral and really important. And I was like, why are we being so reductive, and why is it written in like an ostracizing their kind of weird way? Obviously it's racism, but it really frustrated me.
I think it's so much information about, people Indigenous to North America, all of the different tribes, is the way that I guess anthropologists that were, from the first colonizers, the way that they studied the Indigenous peoples. And so they were very prolific in their documentation. And so much of what I guess the Western understanding is of these cultures is through this really awful like colonial lens. And I was writing when I was writing the book and researching, and I wanted to include an image of Wewa, who is possibly the most well-known two-spirit figure in history. And all of the photos have this colonial lens to them that is really awful, just in terms of how it reveals the position of the photographer and how the power dynamic sits. So in the end, the photo that I used was the most blurry one I could find, where Weiwa was not engaging or looking at the camera or like giving time to the photographer. And I think that I do know what you're talking about, in that it being so frustrating and hard to find anything that feels true, or and of course, why would we have that information? Why would it be in English? Why wouldn't it be in languages? So I guess
like I mean, in part it's fair enough, but it's also frustrating knowing that like the decimation of culture that like colonizers caused. It just like, I feel like I understand the brevity of it. Like as a white person, I feel like I understand the brevity of it, and then I realize like, and then you find out more and more and more, and it's just like it's like impossible to undo the damage, but all we can do is like, continue to tell stories and to share information and fall back onto people who have that lived experience and can share those like real stories that don't have a colonist lens on it. So in terms of the mullet, what I was able to find was that from what I understand, the mullet, or in particular this, what we from a Western perspective understand is like a kind of a mohawk style hairdo, where it was kind of like the hair is kind of pushed up into the air. This sort of style of hair was used as a sign of strength, and particularly in a strength in battle, which I just think is amazing. And there is a tribe, the Nez Perce tribe of the Pacific Northwest, that was, from what I understand, really known for this hair and faced, I guess, a lot of pressure from colonizers to cut their hair and to conform. And so that in particular is documented. So that's Native American history. Flipping over to the American colonizers, we're moving into the late 18th century. And this, I don't know how true this is as well, but apparently President Benjamin Franklin adopted what we know as a skullet, which is bald on top and long at the side. Now, I would say that unless you're punk, just shave your head. Like if you can't grow hair,
I really don't.
I don't know.
I don't think anyone should work with a skullet.
Is that a hot take? I'm sorry. Just get rid of it.
I just think it's reverse practical. You know what the skullet reminds me of, in like you know how there's like always trends with fringes, and obviously beauty trends change over time. And I think it was kind of in that sort of 1600s, 1700s, though I would need to fact check the dates, the fashion for women was to have as much forehead as humanly possible.
So they would shave.
So they'd shave up to the crown of their head and their hair would start kind of on top. And it's kind of all the queens and everything of this era, obviously they felt like they looked good.
I think FKA Twigs has that hairstyle now at the moment doing
I have not seen FKA Twigs.
Not the Batman. What is she doing at the minute? The Crow. Not the Batman, lol. The Crow, yeah. She's got like this crazy shaved right up until her ears, and then it's just this glorious long piece of hair at the back.
Okay. I mean, if FKA Twigs does it, then it's probably
cool, right? So Benjamin Franklin had this skullet as a means of...
I just heard Mary had a little lamb in my head. Like, Benjamin Franklin had a skullet.
Had a skullet. Now, he did this because he wanted to win diplomatic support of the French, and he thought that by having this hairstyle, he would be able to assimilate and kind of, I guess, blend in with the French, because apparently this kind of skullet hairdo was quite popular. Now, according to Reader's Digest...
no one will know. You have a skullet, you're French.
Exactly. Apparently, according to Reader's Digest, he did this to help charm France into drastically increasing its financial and diplomatic support of America in the new nation's earliest days. Can you imagine having your advisors around the round table and you're workshopping how you're going to get your strategy over the line, and head dog up the top of the table.
Literal head dog.
Head dog is literally like, I don't care what you have to say, arts and culture. I don't care what you have to say in economics. Town planning, put your fucking plans in the bin. We don't need that town in the new province. What we need, I need a hairdresser stat. Get one from the estate down the road. I need a skullet right now. Oh my God.
I mean, I wish more politicians would adopt the skullet to try and become more palatable to the masses.
I think so. No, I just can't make it.
Actually, I guess Trump kind of does, because
does he have a toupee?
Got a toupee, so if he took it off,
someone just needs to snatch his toupee.
Yeah.
Oh no, maybe that's why he's popular at the moment with conservatives.
Yeah, because
everyone knows he's got a skullet.
Everyone's bewitched by the skullet.
Okay, so 18th century Benjamin Franklin. Let's backtrack a little bit to Britain in the 17th century.
Got it.
Now. They called this provocative hairdos. Like, this whole mullet thing was happening in the 17th century and they called it provocative. Why was it provocative? I have no idea. But it was sweeping across Europe. It was like the first time in a while that men had long hair. And so it was sort of done by potentially the macaronis, who were bringing that style from France.
That's a reference to our previous episode on the history of macaroni.
And the macaroni scandal.
So check that out.
But monarchs like Philip the Fourth of Spain, I believe it's the fourth, it's 1V. That's 4. Is that 5? That's 6.
That's 4.
That's 4. Yes, I can count in letters.
No, numerals. You can count in numerals.
It's technically a letter. It looks
it's
close.
A Roman numeral.
I know it's a numeral, but my brain interprets it like a. You know what? I think I could do long division if it was in Roman numerals, but I could not do it if it was in a number. I always found Roman numerals really easy to do at school, but I could never do numbers.
What an odd situation to find yourself in.
I don't know. I think
you really were born in the wrong era.
Send me back to 17th century France.
No, you need to go back to ancient Rome so you can do math.
Yes. I could. Yes. That sounds like a good idea.
Yes.
Bill and Ted, where are you? So this monarch in Spain.
Yep.
He thought that it was the beginning of the moral decline for men everywhere.
Now that's gay.
That is very gay. And he said this. He forbade men to wear sumptuous fringes and hair locks in the year of 1639. Now, if someone was...
that he would hate me because I have...
Do you have a sumptuous fringe?
And hair locks.
I think that you could be on his hit list.
I could. I
think that you would be locked up in the year of 1639. I find it hilarious.
For multiple reasons.
For multiple reasons. And I find it hilarious that it was described as sumptuous. Like that to me was so queer and like it was very camp.
And he's obviously, thou doth protest too much because he's obviously finding them sumptuous.
Yes. And this is, I guess, the first time that someone's doing something about the mullet because it's quite political, it's quite avant-garde, it's quite it's a bit of a middle finger, in a way. Like even if it wasn't like as we'll talk about later, sort of anti-establishment vibes. These were fashion-forward men in particular in this instance, putting their foot down and saying, no, it's business in the front, party in the back. I've told you 5 times, Philip. And Philip's saying no. But the
rules are rules.
Rules are rules. But these mullet prohibitions failed because basically everyone was
people couldn't stop.
They couldn't stop. They were jazzed about these mullets. And basically they became a little bit of they were popular basically within the aristocratic circles in the 18th century because wigs were popular. And so it was, again, like these rich people just kind of jumped on the trend and was like, well, we can just get our wig makers to make us a mullet wig and we can wear them.
Rich people ruin everything.
Yeah, so it was hard to ban mullets because people were just wearing wigs. So if you saw a mullet police, you could just rip your wig off.
There were mullet police.
No, but
I really wish there were more moral panics about people's clothing and outfits and hairstyles.
What do you mean? They're happening all the time now.
Yeah, but when has a hairstyle be outlawed?
I mean, let me think. Surely there was haircuts that were really like controversial, like skin. Oh, I guess it's not a haircut, but I'm thinking skinheads in the UK.
Yeah, I
That's
guess
Stan's
so. And
hair.
you couldn't have, a Hitler mustache.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there you go. That's one example.
But I feel like they're associated with particular ideologies. Like I am interested if someone just came in and started doing things and then just experimenting and then to see the government and just freak out.
Well, I will say I do have some fun facts that I was going to leave to the end, but
give them now. I want dessert first.
Okay. Well, in 2010, Iran actually did ban the mullet because they wanted to, or they had the hope of stopping the spread of what they called a Western invasion, which fair enough.
Okay, that's actually kind of
that's
fully
so
fair because I feel like I would ban the mullet if I wanted to stop an invasion of Melbourne-based fuckboys.
Yeah, I was going to say Melbourne, North-based heathays.
Yeah. If you want to stop an invasion of Melbourne's northern heathays, ban the mullet.
Yeah. And then also I don't have this quote in here anymore, but I will try and remember it for you. I believe in 2021, North Korea banned jeans and the mullet.
Yeah, because they go hand in hand. So
I kind
of get that.
I wonder what kind of jeans it was though, if it was jeans. For some reason I think it's jeans or sweatpants. And I can't remember, but both. Ban both, I guess.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah.
Don't stop at one pair of pants. Ban 2.
Totally.
So that's your fun fact that I was saving to the end. However, now as we take ourselves further into history and towards the 20th century, I do just want to stop and signpost. We've now witnessed the beginnings and the birth of the mullet, and what I have attempted to depict is the fact that for a lot of history up until this point, the mullet was for, most intended purposes, like a practical choice. It was a practical thing you did to
go to
war. It became so popular. I believe Rome banned the mullet. Rome did something weird where they either banned the mullet internally in their armies or they like used it to figure out their enemies. Something or other. It was very popular.
Do you mean ancient Rome or modern Rome?
No, ancient Rome, sorry. So it was one of those things that was really highly associated with war. It was highly associated in particular indigenous cultures with, expressing certain qualities and values. And really up until this point, apart from for a period of time in Europe where it kind of started to swell in the higher aristocratic, upper classes, there hadn't really been a fashion moment for the mullet. This had been basically a completely utility-based hairstyle.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is like it was quite popular in the army in America as well. Like again, for the same reason, it was practical. But if you notice in the 20th century, we have what is called like a crew cut, which is like short back and sides.
Yeah.
And that is a haircut that I think is like mandated in the armies.
Yeah.
And that reason is just because it was kind of a marketing tactic, particularly during the First World War, because it was supposed to be reflective of like a fine upper class image of a man in America, like a well put together man, particularly in America. So it's funny how like reasons and rationales kind of change. And it's like hair, I think, is one of those things that we don't think is political, but like it always is.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's just something interesting. And now we have been calling it a mullet this whole time, but obviously as we've traveled across the world and through different various, parts in time, it was not called a mullet during this time. And the mullet, Hannah, guess when it was popularized? What year in the 20th century or decade?
Well, I think a mullet's a kind of fish. So I would say.
Do you think that's where the word comes from?
I'm not sure, but I would say that since people were fishing for a hobby.
I like that answer.
That's what I would say.
That would probably get you an answer on have you been paying attention?
Maybe.
I think it would. I would give you points. Unfortunately, it doesn't have any tiebacks to the fish. It was actually popularized by the Beastie Boys.
Wow, so we're late. There we go.
Yeah, so in the 1994 song Mullet Head, they used both the words mullet and mullet head, and they also combined that with a sung description of the song, which I won't sing because I don't believe they really sing. They mostly just like slam poetry, yell at you, is number 1 on the side and don't touch the back, number 6 on the top and don't cut it whack Jack. So there's a articulate description on how you yourself can get a mullet, but these were words used to describe people that they were talking about in the song.
Okay, so the word for the mullet hairstyle came much later than the hairstyle
in the 70s
and 60s itself. Okay.
Yeah. So what's interesting is there's no one particular word that was used in the 70s, 80s, and even early 90s, obviously, for the mullet. It had a lot of different names. It was very often dependent on what kind of mullet you had or what kind of aesthetic your fashion was, where in the country, particularly of America, you were, or even in the UK. And we will get to 2 famous mullets actually today, talking about them. But a really interesting thing was they didn't just reference this mullet hairstyle in this song. The Beastie Boys actually went on to write a 6-page article entitled Mulling Over the Mullet of their in their magazine called Grand Royale in the year of 1995. So an entire year after they had released this mullet song.
Really? So it was them penning the think pieces.
Exactly. They were. And they offered a selection of alternative names to the haircut, including soccer rocker and hockey player haircut. And if you're wondering.
Okay, the soccer rocker I like.
Yes. The soccer rocker. I like the hockey player haircut. I tell you why, because it sounds good when you say it.
Hockey player haircut. Yeah, it does. Seems to me.
But do you know why they offered hockey player haircut as
I presume it's not because hockey players wore it. Wait, is it because it's like someone with a hockey stick has just like whacked off the top?
No, it's because hockey players did wear this haircut.
Oh, I thought that was too obvious.
No, it's because they did. So in Canada and America, the hockey player haircut was a haircut that hockey players, particularly in, I saw one article cite Minnesota, they let their mullets, which were typically quite short, grow out purposely because it flows and flutters nicely as they skate across the ice.
Nice.
And it was more popular in the 70s before the helmet was widely used in hockey as a sport. So once helmets came into wide use and were mandated in 1979 for new players, this hockey player mullet kind of fell out of fashion, but it was still obviously ingrained in the sports culture. So I'm sure, it was still a thing. But in before 1979, people were rolling around with this like artistic haircut.
Cool.
Which I find so funny because like up until now, like people wore mullets with helmets because it helped, stop the rubbing on the back of their neck. And now it's reversed.
Yeah, now the helmet killed the mullet.
I know, the helmet killed the mullet.
Oh my God.
So aside from hockey players loving the mullet in the 1970s, you mentioned him earlier, David Bowie also loved a mullet.
Yes.
And he had this like amazing like orangey green. Where is my mind today?
Orangey green.
I think he had worn like
That's brown.
Well, I mean, it was an orange. Can't you have an orangey brown? Anyway, he had this orange mullet, which some people say is more of a shag than a mullet. But I would say that like,
nah, I've seen him looking pretty mullety.
Yeah. Now, this is the first time that the intersection between queer culture and queer history meets the mullet for the first time. And this is because David Bowie really was the first, at least queer-coded at the time and retrospectively queer, I suppose, person to popularize the mullet. And hair historian Janet Stevens says this: Bowie's radical androgynous style combined what were traditionally seen as male, short, and female, long elements. Not only did it push the margins of hair and dress, it challenged ideas on identity and gender boundaries. And this was because it was sort of the first time that the mullet was taken out of its original context, which was utility or being seen on people who were either really, really masculine, a la hockey players, or really, really feminine, like, I don't know, someone like...
An aristocrat?
Maybe an aristocrat in 17th, yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
that would be a good point. Or maybe macaroni is a better.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, like a macaroni in the 17th century. And so it was the first time that we were kind of looking at a juxtaposition of ideas because the mullet was put into a fashion aesthetic that wasn't 100% mask, it wasn't 100% femme. It was like like Stephen says, an androgynous mix. And so in this sense, it was the first time that we really saw the mullet coming out as queer, coming out of the closet almost.
Yeah.
Other people around this time were Joan Jett and Cherie Currie from the Runaways, Suzi Quatro.
Yeah.
And so this group of people, this group of glam rock or rock stars during the 70s and the early 80s, they were the first group of people that pulled the mullet into a place of being something that rejected mainstream beauty standards because it was in complete contrast to what the expectations of gender and the expectations of mainstream fashion and beauty were. And it was, I guess, a real moment of what we would consider androgynous fashion. And what's really interesting is that obviously like during this time we had these people, for example, like I know Joan Jett and Bowie, were probably queer. And so, again, we have these like, I guess, it's queer coding, but it's not because they're queer, sort of people out there. And also like this, because it was like famous people who were wearing the mullet and they were, everywhere, their faces were everywhere. We had other people like Katie Lang in the 90s, like had a mullet, and the Indigo Girls in the late 80s. And in particular, like, particularly when we see women during this time who had the mullet, it was in stark contrast to like what we would call the macho man aesthetic, which was this like Southern guy who like was out in the swamp with his gaiters and had a mullet, like that kind of guy, or the hockey player who was like, yes, it was kind of flowing out the back, but it had no connotation of being feminine. It had, because of this war history it kind of has, whether people knew it or not. It was like this it was contrasting. And in that way, like I think the mullet is camp, you know?
I think it is because it does like defy it defies kind of beauty standards and the idea of what's considered flattering. And I think it is androgynous in a sense of, for women who wear the mullet, it's a really easy kind of, I guess, like a counterculture kind of fuck you to long hair by just, getting rid of the top. And then I think, even for men, there was a strong a strong lineage of camp that ran through the 80s, particularly through these glam rockers, because you did have to sort of look after your hair, the long part of it at least, for it to be a mullet. And I think with people like Bowie, their mullets were quite beautiful. I think it eventually did devolve into some of those more kind of macho mullets, where they might not have looked after their hair, but it was glam, and glam rock is camp.
Yeah, it was glam. And I think what I found at this point in my what I found during this point of like learning the history of the mullet was that like name a subculture or name like a demographic or a stereotype during like the 70s, 80s and 90s, even now, like people were wearing mullets. Like people in this like in the Floridian swamps, that was mullets, people working on ranches, mullets, goths, mullets, or maybe not goths, they'll fight me on that, but punks, mullets, glam rockers, mullets, like everyone seemed to have a mullet, but it was like everyone was kind of doing it for their own reasons, whether it was fashion, whether it was like being unified in a group of people, whether it was like practical reasons because you were out in the sun and, whatever, wearing helmets, like everyone kind of had their own reason to wear a mullet. And what I found really interesting was that like it wasn't until it fell out of fashion, which we'll get to, that the opinion, the generalized opinion of whether a mullet was tacky and disgusting or high fashion is when that kind of comes up.
And I feel like that's where we move into kind of it becoming a really queer hairstyle, because it was deliberately ugly.
Yes, exactly. But before we get there, I want to take a stop off and jump off the train station to meet maybe a man who had one of the most well-known, well-looked-after, beautiful mullets. That would be none other than Billy Ray Cyrus, who had
Stunning.
who had what we would call a Kentucky waterfall. That's what
I want to smoke that.
Yeah, I know. He loved it so much that he wrote a song in 2006 called I Want My Mullet Back. Now, this is where we have a mini game, Hannah. Have you watched Cool Runnings?
Yeah.
Okay. I want you to feel the rhythm, feel the rhyme, get on up. It's melody time. And this is the mini game where, due to copyright reasons, I cannot play you the song I Want My Mullet Back by Billy Ray Cyrus, but what I can do you is give you the lyrics and make you make the melody up yourself.
Okay. All right. And I have not heard this song.
No, which is the point.
Okay.
So we'll listen to the song off, and Matt, our editor, will have to mute it because I'm put in some elevator music, but and then we'll see how correct you were.
Okay.
But this is the lyrics. I'm going to come and deliver them to you now because you don't have your computer.
All right. So we've got.
So this is.
Bell bottoms are really cool. Cutting class. All right.
Wait, let me.
Well, it's going to be country. So I'm going to go with.
Wait. Let me get in my seat. Okay. Go.
Bell bottoms were really cool, cutting class and skipping school. I remember packing that old fishing pole, skinny dipping at a swimming hole. Backlight, red lights, strobe lights too, were all the rage for me and you. Only one thing I miss more than that. I want my mullet back. Okay, how did I go?
I don't know. We're going to find out.
Okay.
Right. Did you sing both the verse and the chorus?
Oh, sorry, that was just the verse. Okay. Wait. All right, the chorus. I want my mullet back, my old Camaro and my 8-track. Fuzzy dice hanging loose and proud. Double Z top, they're playing loud. A simple time, that's what I miss. Your miniskirt and your sweet kiss. Things are changing, man, and that's a fact. I want my mullet back.
Bravo.
Thank you.
Oh my God.
Thank you. How did I go? You better get that up. I think that was
perfect.
Good. I think it was good.
I sat there and I contemplated this for a long time, and I had no idea how it should sound. Like I kind of, for me, this song should have gone like, I remember packing that old fishing pole, skimming, dipping at a swimming hole, backlight, red lights, and strobe lights too. Something like that. Like,
so
I don't know, like a
less of
faster.
ballad. Yeah, less of a ballad.
All right, so we're going to have to elevator music this. Matt's going to work his magic, but here we go. This is Hannah for you, your ears only. You ready?
Yep. I'm actually not wrong. I was close. Okay, I kind of nailed that.
I want to get to the chorus. How are we going? Come on. I want my
Mullet back. Mullet back.
Wow.
I was surprisingly close.
I think that was incredible. That was true. You are, I think, today's Mozart.
I am. It's like I see words and then a melody comes out of me.
Well, thank you for doing that. Now, we had to play that mini game because I just genuinely, we can't play the song on the show. I looked it up. Copyright says that if we play it, we'll never be allowed to make another podcast. So thank you for indulging me there. But this is the thing. I think it's really funny because like retrospectively, a lot of people who had mullets who were very famous in the 80s are like, I hate that thing. Why did I ever do that? It was disgusting. However, Billy Ray, at least in 2006, really missed his mullet. I feel like for him in particular, it was a large part of his identity. It was a large part of like, I guess, the kind of culture he probably grew up in, that being of a Kentucky waterfall culture. And I really love that he immortalized his feelings in a song. However, I will say that like briefly after the 80s, particularly when you kind of come into the late 90s when the Beastie Boys were using mullet and mullet head as like derogative terms towards people with this kind of haircut, like it was an unfashionable thing to have. It meant that you were part of a lower economic class than perhaps it was desirable. And so in this way, we kind of leave the doors open to what you were saying earlier, Hannah, queer people taking the helm of the mullet and really running with it and making it our own. And I think what we see is, you know, like I said, Katie Lang is a good example of queer women, you know, women loving women, lesbians, using this haircut as a way of not only identifying themselves and I guess like what's the phrase, like queer flagging to other people in the LGBTQ plus community, but it was used as like as a feminist statement as well, as like a big FU to I guess the kind of lipstick lesbian trends that kind of found themselves pop up in the late 90s, early 2000s. And so in that sense, again, this is another time that rather than in mainstream culture with David Bowie and the glam rockers of the 70s, in the 90s it really kind of became an underground sort of, not a trend, but like something that queer people did.
Yeah, like almost a symbol. And I think that it's important, like you said, mullets were associated with lower socioeconomic classes. And so working class solidarity was massive among, you know, the radical lesbian community. So I think that would come into it as well. They absolutely would have like tapped into those semiotics and used them or appropriated them, because it was not only was it a class marker, but it was also staunchly against beauty standards.
Yeah. And so like broadly speaking, mullets in the queer community started to crop up for a couple of reasons. Like you said, like it's something against beauty standards. It's because obviously, you know, we have historically not felt comfortable like in regular kind of hairdressers. Like so many of us have gone in for like a mascara femme haircut and come out with the opposite, and just because like the person in there isn't like equipped to understanding what you're actually wanting from a haircut. And so Rachel Gibson, the hair historian who has a great Instagram called The Hair Historian, so definitely check her out. But she says that, yeah, queer people probably weren't going to a mainstream salon and instead doing hairstyles themselves at home, which, you know, again,
it's not the hardest style to do.
It's not the hardest style to do. And we've all tried to cut the back of our hair and it, you know, we had to call our sister or our friends over to fix it because it's just gone terribly. So in that sense, queer people did you do the mullet for that reason, 80s, 90s and onwards. And it was in turn, I guess, broadly seen as an ugly hairstyle because anyone that was doing it was either doing it for the same reasons that queer people did it. They didn't have access to hair salons and hairstyles, or they perhaps were doing it for a practical reason because they were working labor jobs in the sun and needed that hair protection on their necks, or because it was just ingrained in their culture inherently, but their culture was not deemed worthy enough to be fashionable. So
I think there was, you know, what I saw with the big over the last, like I would say over the last decade, there's been a big mullet revival in Australia in particular and in Melbourne, and it was really led by the queer community here. It was the and by queer I'm sort of also looking at the genderqueer community and the more kind of queer versus gay subsection, and it really came from like this co-opting of bogan, which is I guess the Australian version of a redneck. But this bogan type stereotype that comes with Australian culture, and there was a thing where queer people were kind of appropriating that because, you know, when you've grown up in Australia, particularly if you're, if you're queer or you're a guy, you have always been sort of treated like the antithesis of this like core Australian culture. And so by co-opting that look recently has been, something that's been really affirming for like a lot of queer and trans people. And then, now I see 14-year-olds with their mullets. It's fully trickled down.
Yeah, it is really interesting. And I think you're so right. Like as well, the resounding sentiment from writers and from articles that I was reading when I was looking this up was that queer people, and we know this because we talk about this all the time, like we regularly reappropriate, remix, kind of create like reculture, that's not really a term, things that are considered uncool. And it's either because like it's just like we think they're cool, we think it's camp, we think it's ironic, we think it's like something or other, and we're like, no, this is cool now. And
ugliness is a core pillar of camp. Like we made Crocs. I'm sorry. Queer people made Crocs.
Queer people made Crocs. The mullet for me came into vogue again was like during lockdowns in 2020.
Because of home hairstyle.
The home hairstyles. People had maybe like short hair and were growing it out and hated like the fringe and cut back the fringe. People were doing it intentionally as a joke, like, ha, 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 we're in lockdown. Like this is the only time I'm going to be able to do a mullet. And I think in that way, like, again, queer people really drove that style and that fashion, particularly because like we were just, I think a lot of us were just taking the piss initially. Because like when you think about it, like I know Rihanna, Miley Cyrus had done the mullet before 2020, but it was seen as this sort of like very chic take on something that wasn't accessible to everyone, because if someone who wasn't a multi-billionaire tried to do it, it would look bad. But in like, particularly lockdown, I know I got a mullet. I don't know when I started my mullet.
No, I remember. I knew you when you had a mullet.
I think, and that mullet had a lot of iterations. At one point, it just got cut so short and someone said that I wore a plaid shirt and someone said that I looked like a bogan. And I think like the next week I cut my hair off because I was like, no, it's done its time. It needs to go. But now I'm back there again.
Okay.
I don't think I'm going to have such a slick mullet as I did with that very thick, short fringe with the shaved sides and the long back. I don't think I'm going to go there again. But I am like in a shaggy baby mullet vibe because it kind of looks elven to me.
It does look elven.
Yeah. Would you ever get a mullet? Like, or do you think again it's like too tainted?
I wouldn't right now because I just think, everyone's had a mullet and I already had a mullet. But yeah, in future I definitely would. I think it's good for curly hair. It's a very forgiving, with curly hair, like you want layers and stuff in different lengths. So a mullet is great for that. And it's really fun. So I think I would definitely get a mullet again. I think, just like I don't think that they're, even though I think they really are at their core a queer haircut. I think anyone is having a mullet now, which is great. But I think there's going to be a time when they fall back out of fashion, and it will still be the queers that are still wearing them. So yeah, it's possible. And maybe I'm just trying to be countercultural by waiting till they're out of fashion again before I get one.
I mean, maybe. I think that's the thing though. That's so kind of frustrating, but also like delightful about like the mullet is that it's so hard to know who did what and when and why. Like all that people say is like, particularly about queer people now having a mullet, it's like there's so many different reasons why people have a mullet, and it's the same as why people had mullets back in the 70s or why queer people had mullets back in the 70s. Like it's whatever, and like it's always been about gender, it's always been about politics, it's always been about beauty standards, it's always been about class, like, And so I'm like,
the mullet is merely a proxy for humanity itself.
Exactly. And what is part of humanity? Queer people. Like, you know what I mean? But even when you look at the history of the mullet, it's pretty queer, just inherently by association, I would say.
With the Romans.
And the Greeks and the Vikings.
Yeah.
The 17th century Europeans.
Yeah.
It's everywhere. I will always love mullets. I think they're a great haircut. I think they really frame the face. They can be quite striking though.
They can
be quite striking. I do want to finish with a quote.
My God.
And you're going to love this. As we just said, mullets rose to fame in 2020. Now, who was someone famous in 2020 that we all got behind? Or rather, was staunchly against?
Trump.
Joe Exotic.
Oh, of course.
He has what is called a cullet or a curly mullet. So that's what you would have.
Yeah, that's what I would have.
And in the show that I don't even know the name of the show anymore. Tiger King, that's right. How can I forget? He's standing in front of a mirror and he says, got to get those curls out. They're my sex appeal. And
that checks out.
Checks out. And what better way to reframe business in the front, party in the back? And that's all on Joe Exotic. So thanks, Joe. And that closes out my wild romp around history with the mullet. If that hasn't inspired you to get a mullet, nothing will. And it's not for you. But if you do get a mullet off the back of this episode, you know where to find us.
Well, if you do happen to do that, please get in touch with us. You can literally DM us, like we get everything. So if you want to do that, you can hit us up on social media.
Yeah, get us over at Rainbow History Class on Instagram, TikTok. You can join our Patreon. We've got a free tier. So if you don't feel like throwing us some coins, there's a free tier for you. Or you can drop your mullet pics straight into the Discord with the rest of the community. Or come and show us your mullet in real life because like we said up the top of the show, we're playing Brisbane Melt Festival in November. The dates are November 7th, 8th and 9th, all at 6:45 p.m. And you can check out the show at bit.ly/RHC Brisbane Melt. So that's bit.ly/RHC Brisbane Melt. And yes, I did labor on that because that's our first ever bit.ly link and I'm quite proud of that.
I'm proud that you're proud.
Thank you.
And up until then, I'm going to leave you with an quote almost as good as that one from Joe Exotic. And that is, not everything is gay, but there is gay in everything, in both the front and the back.